The Springfield City Council faces one of the most important decisions a council is called upon to make, and that's the selection of its city manager. And this is going to have to be done in just the next few weeks. While you would think that the process should be transparent, many questions remain unanswered. Both the city's public information office and the search firm which the city hired declined my request for interviews about the whole selection process. I was told all the information is available on the city's website, but significant concerns persist. What we do know is this. The City Council hired Strategic Government Resources, the same firm that recruited our recently departed city manager, Jason Gage, about 5 years ago. Gage, as you may know, just negotiated a payout without having another job. The firm has capped its fee at what seems to be a low number, $35,000. For context, this fee is notably lower than typical executive search costs for comparable positions in organizations of similar size. This leaves us with several pressing questions about the process. Is the search firm compensated in other ways? Are there potential conflicts of interest? Who is the candidate pool? In other words, what pond are they going to be fishing out of? Can the firm's experience, which if you look on the website shows that it primarily is involved in placing city managers in much smaller communities, find recruit candidates for a city the size of Springfield with nearly a population of 200,000 people? And then there's the question about the timing. The council has been mum about whether it's going to wait until the April election for mayor and council. Should the new mayor and the new council members have any input into the hiring of the process? If so, why or why not? We don't know. To help explore these critical questions and share their insights on executive recruitment, I am joined today by three Springfieldians well known for their experience in high-level hiring. Tom Finnie, former city manager at Springfield, Cliff Smart, former Missouri State University president, and Steve Edwards, former CEO of CoxHealth. Gentlemen, welcome to In Our Town.
A lot of formers here.
Yeah, I'm a former too. At least I didn't call you a has-been.
That's why we're all smiling.
Yes.
Let me kick off with you, Cliff. Both you and Steve were involved in the recent search for a new chief executive officer at City Utilities. What are your thoughts about whether we should even use a search firm?
You know, I've often used search firms, and we did for the CU search. I think there's two or three important reasons to me. One is you expand your search. Some searches must be national. Just make sure we get the most talented people. The second is search firms often have networks of talented people that they know may or may not be looking, and so you get that connection. And third, and maybe the most important to me, is I'm interested in people that aren't necessarily looking for jobs. So if there are relationships that they can tap into someone who's happy in their job but maybe wants to grow, contrary to maybe someone who's looking for a job or has lost a job, I'd rather have someone who's prospering and wants to grow, and so I think those national search firms can help with that.
Well, you have to dig a little deeper if you're going to follow that kind of process as opposed to essentially publish a fancy want ad on the web.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, I you know, when I was at the university, we hired probably a dozen vice president level people, as well as many academic leaders. And then, as Steve said, we're both on the City Utilities Board, and we just went through that search for a new CEO and general manager. I also went through a search for a new Commissioner of Higher Education about 8 years ago, and I was on that search. And so you know, we all have a good bit of experience at both hiring for the C-suite and hiring a CEO. And somebody has to do the work. Right? If you're not having a search firm then you have to have competent internal staff that can do the work, that can reach out, that can do background checks, that can do reference checks, that can call offline, that can coordinate all the material coming through, that know the HR, that know the legal requirements, etc. Somebody's got to manage the search. And so, one of the things we would do and we didn't always use a search firm, probably 50-50. Because there is a cost associated with it, and we might come back to the cost question in a minute, but there is a cost. I mean, typically when you're searching for a CEO, you're going to pay over $100,000 for a top-line search firm to help you create that pool. And so, in every search you don't need to spend that money, and particularly I thought when we had good internal candidates for a position that we were searching for, we wouldn't always hire a search firm because we didn't think the money was well spent. The one negative I see with a search firm is sometimes they steer you to a candidate they're pushing. And we had
Well,
that.
let's stop right there.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you maybe ask for who's already in the corral before you hire them? Because if I've got 10 people out here looking for a job, it's pretty easy to place one and just go through the motions.
Well, that's what I was referring to in terms of an internal candidate. If you know, for example, when Jim Baker, who was my vice president for research and economic development, retired, we knew we had two great assistant or associate vice presidents that were both going to apply for that job. And we would have been well served to go either direction. We didn't feel we needed to hire a search firm to fill that spot. So there, you do need a sense of, are you going to attract candidates without a search firm before you decide that you want to pay that money? And kind of my point was, my predecessor, we used a search firm when we hired Dr. Kofer. And in retrospect, we suspected that the search firm had him in mind from the beginning. And again, you have to, that's just one of the dangers you have to navigate if you go with a search firm.
Well, we've got a ex-hospital CEO, a university CEO talking about this. Probably you know more about it than anybody, what really happens in municipalities. Tom, what are your thoughts?
Just in municipalities, my sense is that it's much like Cliff and Steve's, that it's worth $35,000 just to have somebody organize the damn thing. I mean, when you get right down to it, you're talking about 9 council members and a mayor, and just getting them in the same room together sometimes is tricky. So having someone that can focus them is really it's worth $35,000.
Well, with me at least, the question isn't whether it's worth $35,000. The question is that enough to get a good job done?
I'm going to come to that.
All right.
So I don't have any serious problems with the headhunter. I think they serve a purpose. My concern is it's mainly a punch list. I mean, they've got their punch list. It looks like every other headhunter's punch list, I think. My concern is once the headhunter and the client, in this case the city, has punched or anything out, they sit back and say they've done their job. And I think they're on a long way from having done their job.
Okay.
When they just go through that punch list, which goes back to your issue. I think I think the most important step is the council coming together and laying out what they believe is the goal of the new manager, or the goal of the community, really, that they expect the new manager to help make happen. And that is a whole different series of questions. It goes back to the size of the city that they ought to be interviewing candidates from. It goes to a lot of other issues which is not touched by the headhunter. But so I think my concern is that they not get overconfident that they've done their job. They have not finished their job. There's a lot more and a lot more important stuff to go in my mind.
You know, when we were doing the city utilities search, one of the meaningful things the search firm headed up was exactly what Tom was talking about, surveying the employees, having focus groups to get feedback in terms of what was right with the utility, what you know, where could we have improvement, what did we think about the CEO, what kind of qualifications did we have. And then the search firm worked, the board was the search committee in that, and the search firm worked with us to talk through a lot of those issues. And
So your point is that a heck of a lot of spade work needs to be done in advance.
And you need to have, if you're going to use a search firm, you want to have them on from the beginning because they can be really helpful in facilitating that.
You know, the other thing I would add too is, and I agree with Cliff, that for most of our VP level positions, I would rather develop someone internally. But for that top spot, it's so critical. And it's likely that you might have to have a national search. I also like the idea, and the example for city utilities, we did a national search and came all the way back to one of the original candidates who was at CU. And to me, that helps with the mandate because we looked all over the country and we felt like the person we got was the best qualified. And so you kind of work
So
through that.
it's, you can say that deal wasn't rigged at the outset.
No, Cliff and I will agree it was not for him. It was a very strenuous, rigorous process. We had great candidates. I think in the end, we were unanimous. We agreed that we had the right candidate, but boy, we had some great opportunities. We had some really good candidates.
And I would tell our listening audience that we didn't go into that city utility general manager search knowing who we were going to hire.
Right.
I mean, and many of us, if not all of us on the board, were very interested in exploring external candidates. But as Steve said, when push came to shove, we thought we had the right guy right here.
Yeah.
Well, you know, let's say I was a guy who came from another town and was interested in being considered a city manager for Springfield. I'm probably unlikely to give you references from the people who I've made unhappy in the past.
Right.
To what extent should a good due diligence process go beyond the references of my friends and my acquaintances at church?
I mean, I have strong feelings about that. And I think even a professional search firm often doesn't do a good enough job on that reference check. It's kind of checking the boxes. I think of so many examples of how deep we went on reference checks, particularly for like a unique physician specialty. I remember we had a candidate that was really excited to come who had premier credentials. And it was at one of our other hospitals, and the administrator wanted to hire this person. And I did a Google search and found that he had run into the sign of his last hospital, having just performed a procedure. The police found that he was drunk, and he tried to bribe the police. That took 10 seconds. The search firm didn't find that.
My goodness.
The Google search found it. So
Wow.
we have sent people to other hospitals to sit in the medical records lounge to visit with doctors, get a feel for them. I think you have to go really deep, especially if it's a job as important as a city manager, right? Checking boxes isn't sufficient to me.
I would add to that, I think the most important thing that can be done is just to send some local folks to the town, or at a minimum make phone calls, but visiting is even better. And this city is blessed with some really sharp leaders. And I have never had a single one of them turn me down if I ask them for a favor, you know, can you help us with this? They always have been very cooperative. And I can remember when I was being considered for city manager, I was in Charlotte. And I got a call from the lady who was head of the Discovery Center in Charlotte. She said, can you run by here for a few minutes? I said, sure. She said, I've had a visitor, and it was kind of unusual. And a local architect from Springfield was in Charlotte on business. It had nothing to do with this. But he took up the opportunity, because he was involved with our Discovery Center, to go by and visit with her for about an hour about, you know, how do you and the city get along? What does the city do? I mean, it was a pretty pretty good interview. And of course, once it was over, she got nervous. Because he wasn't expecting an interview. She just thought an architect wanted to see their building. But it made a lasting impression on me that that architect knew more about me and Charlotte than the headhunter did, and that probably anybody else in Springfield knew about me, because she knew me. I mean, we worked together for, at that point, 3 or 4 years. I thought, that's a damn good idea. That is really a good idea, to send somebody and have a non-official visit. And we've done that with some of our department head vacancies. But I think it really ought to be done. And I can see a Dave Steffler talking to his counterpart on a newspaper. I can see a Jack Stack or a Jim Anderson or a Matt Morrow talking to their counterparts in the chamber or in a business like this. And those things are not ugly. They're not, aggressive. They're just, tell us about, how did he get along? How did she get along? I think it's the single best thing you can do.
And you have to do that whether you have a search firm or not. I
have no interest in the search firm doing that.
I agree with Steve. Oftentimes the search firm doesn't even want to do that.
They should. I wouldn't want them involved.
And so a thought and a story. I would never hire anybody without talking to their current boss. So maybe you can't do that at the beginning. But when you get down to, I'm going to hire Tom Finnie to be my vice president, I'm going to say, Tom, I need to talk to your boss before I offer you this job. And that's absolutely critical.
Yeah. It was common knowledge in Charlotte that I was a finalist for this job. So it wasn't
They
like,
weren't betraying a confidence.
she wasn't going around anybody.
Right.
Everybody knew.
Yeah.
And I'd already told my immediate group. Everybody knew about it. So
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%.
The other thing is, so many times people don't do this. Like, I've had lots of second level people go to other universities and got hired without anyone calling.
Right.
Right?
That's insane.
And what you miss from that is, we were recently hiring a new dean of the College of Agriculture. And this person that was a finalist worked at another school within one of our sports leagues. So I knew their president. So I just called him up. Hey, tell me about X. And he said, just between us, Cliff, I wouldn't hire this guy. And he told me why.
Right.
Boom. If you don't make that call, you don't get that information. And most times, talking CEO to CEO or peer to peer, they're going to honestly tell you about the person.
One, because they don't follow HR rules, because we shouldn't share that, right? But CEO to CEO, we don't follow.
You don't do it exactly the way.
Right. But it may be that
You just say, that'd be an interesting choice.
I've told someone we have a legal agreement that doesn't allow me to speak of this former employee. That's enough for them to understand what happened.
That's code, right?
That's code, right?
Yeah.
But you have to. I'm like Cliff. We've had people hired. I'm like, they should have asked us. This is a real big mistake. I can't believe they didn't even call.
Well, does anybody?
It should be somebody from Springfield, in a top level, business or whatever, that makes that call or makes that visit, not the headhunter,
Yeah.
and certainly not somebody from the city.
You can't just run the city by itself and be successful. There are other players that want to and need to, and we're all better if we're engaged. If the city and and Missouri State are working hand in hand, good things happen. If we're at loggerheads, bad things happen. And so character, tone, style, kind of vision, all those things I think are important. You've got to have a good fit. And by that, I don't mean we have to hire a 45-year-old white man. Anyone can be a good fit that brings those kind of qualities to the community.
Well, let me drill down on that comment. Feel free to agree or disagree, but when I looked at who the search firm had been placing people with for the last 6 or 7 years, by far the populations of those towns are 20 or 30,000 people. There's occasionally a larger one, but certainly in the minority. What's the likelihood that a person that's coming from a small town like that can get up to speed with in a community that's much more complex, that has to deal with a lot of issues that you don't have to, at least to that extent, in a smaller town?
You know, I'm gonna look at it from a city manager perspective versus the whole community, but, and we touch on, I agree with Steve and, Cliff, that what impressed me about the council's comments when I was, they didn't talk about growing, they didn't talk about, they said, we wanna get the community moving. And that's, the nuances there are pretty impressive. I mean, that a city councilor could work through the difference between saying, we need someone to take over the building department. That is not, that's what, in my profession, we call a one-trick pony. Okay, you wanna hire someone to fix this, go hire somebody, but don't have the city manager. So I think it's, in my mind, the main difference between smaller communities and larger communities is the staff in larger communities, particularly in the manager's office, have learned that the only way you can be a large city is to learn to delegate, learn to take risk, to some extent, thinking out the box, but I think that's what we use. But being able to delegate and take risk is the key to growing. And most small towns, managers are not in a position to take risk and to delegate. They don't have anybody to delegate to, for one thing. So they tend to be very, very competent. They know more about water lines than I ever learned.
They're very hands-on.
They're very hands-on, thank you. I think that constricts or increases the odds that they will not make a good large city. I'm gonna call Springfield, 200,000 people is right on the verge of being a major city. I think the odds are much better to find someone that would work well in Springfield and be willing to take those risks and to delegate, which is a risk by itself, than from a medium or smaller city. So I think it's absolutely critical that the council direct the headhunter and direct their own efforts toward making sure they get enough candidates that are assistant city managers. If you don't have enough peas in the pot, you're not gonna have a good soup. I mean, you gotta have enough people to draw from. So I think that is one of the number one issues. Now,
Well, let me jump in here with an observation, and you guys can react to it. So again, let's just assume I'm a younger person and thinking about coming to apply for this job. One of the first questions I think I'm gonna ask myself is, who's my boss? And I'm gonna be reading the Springfield Daily Citizen for, got a plug there, for
well done.
for the last year or two, and so, is this what about this council? Is it always a 5-4 vote? Do they seem to get along? Do they seem to be on the same page? Because you know, if they're divided like that, one guy or gal has to change their vote, and you're out of job. And who wants to take? Who's willing to take that risk unless you've been fired already? You know, and
Well, Steve talked about an opportunity we have with a new mayor and one or more new council members coming on. I do think that's a legitimate concern, right? So if you're working in a job somewhere, either as a city manager of a smaller community or an assistant city manager of a larger community, there are only so many jobs you can apply for without your boss getting mad at you, right? And so, are you going to pick Springfield? Well, Tom, you talked about there may be family connections or other things that help you with that. But knowing who the council is and who the mayor is and what their focus is helps you figure out if you'd be aligned with that, if you'd be good at if you're good at what the jobs are,
Right.
coming. And so I don't think it's a bad thing to get the search going, but I would be cautious of a current council making a hire before the election, because I think the pool will likely grow after the election when people know who's in it and what our focus is.
There's more certainty.
And there's more certainty, right? I mean, and so if you're in one of those people looking to make a move, and you're thinking, I can probably apply for 2 jobs in the next year, well, you want to make sure this is one of the ones that you feel good about. And so I personally would be I'd be slow walking this to make sure that our new mayor and our new council really get the ultimate say, and it's not too late to get people in the pool at that point.
Right.
I agree. I get nervous about non-elected officials trying to focus on division in the council. I mean, our system basically thrives on differences of opinion with elected officials. So I believe the system works pretty good, but I think that a sophisticated council and mayor can make clear the difference between, we've had some interesting zoning issues with our city. On the other hand, we are 100% in favor of moving the community forward and what that means. And I think you can finesse that issue if you do it honestly. Speaking for myself, I really think it's important that a new council select the city manager. I can only speak from my experience, but in my experience, I can still remember the names of almost all the council members that were on council when I was appointed. And I'm 84 years old. I can't remember crap, but I can remember those 9 names because that was really meaningful to me. And they provided 6 months, a year, an opportunity for me to learn about the community, make some mistakes without having an old counselor. They were protecting me for the first year, and that helped me a lot. And I think it's really important that a new city manager has that sense. These were the people that selected me. They've got skin in the game. They want me to succeed. Now, I don't see how you start a search process separate from the selection process, but I guess it could be done. So that would be a new twist.
You know, those points resonate with me for a couple of reasons. One is I would never work somewhere where I didn't know who my boss was.
Right.
And if you think of it,
There's that too.
right? And if you think of it, you know, the numbers say that people don't quit their company, they quit their boss. And so that relationship's really important. And, you know, and as Tom said, maybe better than I can say, is the group that selects you tends to support you better. They had a voice in that selection. And, you know,
They got skin in the
they
game.
got skin in the game. And the politics is difficult, and I want someone that chose me because they may give me an allowance. They maybe give me a
Right.
chance when things get a little dicey. They knew me and they're part of that decision. So now, on the other hand, we've got a great city council. We've had a good one for a long time. We're going to have a little bit of change. I think those changes will probably generally be positive. And when I look at the candidates, even for mayor, I think we've got great mayoral candidates. So I can see the process going as it is, beginning, but you sure would want the new mayor to be involved in that process. That relationship's so critical.
Cliff, do you have a comment?
No, I think we're all in agreement on that. And as I think back over searches that we started at the end of my tenure, I mean, one of the questions was, Cliff, how long are you going to be here? Right? Because people that are interviewing for that jobs, they're thinking, I want to work for this guy. I'm applying for this job because they didn't know me yet. They thought they wanted to work with me and be on that team. And so, super important, that relationship between you and your boss is absolutely critical. And I think I was successful by and large to the extent I was at the university because I was working hand in glove with my board, right? If you get contrary in there, that's when things start to fall apart. And so that relationship between board and CEO is super critical for the success of an organization.
When I was involved in that stuff, we pounded the drum of transparency a lot, and now no longer being involved. I'm not so sure. I think it's a good idea. I was involved in one university search for president and like 3 city managers, and depending on how things were going in the community, it affected whether somebody was going to apply or not. And just as Cliff said here a few minutes ago, if you're applying for a job, there's only so many times you can do that, and without your boss coming to you and say, "You really want to work here or not?" And wasn't it David Belcher that applied? And he was a very popular dean at Missouri State, and he applied when Mike Nitzel was hired, and he didn't get the job, and he went to Little Rock, University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And I remember that at that point, somewhere along the process, Drury was looking for a new president. And I talked to David about it. He said, "Tom, there's only so many times I can do this without my boss is going to be thinking maybe he should replace me." So my point is, what we would do in the past is we would march out 3 or 4 or 5 final candidates, and they are, like Cliff said a minute ago, I got 1 or 2, I want to take a shot once or twice in a year, but there's a limit to how you can do it. And I don't think, frankly, I think so often it was just a dog and pony show. I don't think it changed anybody's mind. And so I wonder if it wouldn't be better to, in the hopes of getting the best candidate possible, to just narrow it down to 1 woman or 1 man and make your pick, as opposed to exposing other candidates to the public. What do you guys think?
So, I think there are pluses and minuses. At city utilities, or the school board, or the hospital, a lot of times we've just publicly announced a finalist and then a decision. At the university, at our university, Missouri State, there's been a history of bringing in a final pool of candidates, and the last time we brought in 3. University's a little different because you've got constituent groups that have real power, right? Faculty has real power for curriculum, and so they need a say in terms of what it is. And so, I've always been at the university level a proponent of bringing in more than 1 candidate. This last time there were 3 really good candidates, and there was real debate among which way would be better for the university. But I don't think you have to do that. The school board brought in Dr. Lathan as their finalist, and we did the same thing at city utilities. And, that can also work, and sometimes it does get you a better, bigger pool of candidates.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, if you have to be public, you do risk people that don't want to put themselves out there. And so in some ways, I think there's advantages in being a private entity where you can do that whole process kind of privately. At a university, it's got to be very public. And so I think the culture accepts that. But I would hate to have to do that in a hospital setting, because you bring in 3 candidates and 2 of them don't get the job. Those 2 are in trouble at their, current employer. Especially at the CEO level. If your CEO is looking, that's a problem. So you've got to balance that out for sure.
Those are about all the questions I had, but maybe there's some concluding thoughts that anybody would care to make.
I'm intrigued by the question about openness. I have found myself going back and forth on that issue. And trying to figure out, is there some way you can accomplish both being open as well as not exposing people? And I think both of you all talked a little bit about the idea of, if you have it down to the final 2 or 3, that helps a lot. Now, when I was hired, hell, they had an open house. They had a party. They had everybody in the community was invited, and it was like.
Well, we probably screwed up the search, Tom, but we just got lucky. Never discount luck.
That was unusual. But I don't know, maybe it's age, but I find myself leaning more toward a hybrid system where you do it quietly without publicity till you get to the point where you've got 2 or 3 really good candidates, and then you talk to them and say, hey, it would be better if we were open about this before we selected one, but if that's going to be a problem, we can think about it. Because sometimes it's not a problem. I mean, for me, it was not a problem. I thought it was kind of funny to have, 300 people at part of the interview. But to me, that's the closest I've come to a hybrid approach of saying, get down to 3 and then talk to them about what they're comfortable with before you announce.
One thought on the current search that we're focused on, I think it's common knowledge, or at least presumed, that we don't have an internal candidate.
Well, I was going to ask about that.
Right? So again,
But you may have a local candidate.
Could have a local candidate. I'm more inclined to for an open process of more than one finalist when we don't have an internal candidate. You do if you have a really strong internal candidate, you can do a closed search and really look at the field. Are there people out there that we think are better than our internal candidate? And when you have a strong internal candidate, a lot of times external people think it's already decided and they're not in the pool. So, when you have a strong internal candidate, I think I lend towards doing more of a closed search. When you don't have a solid person that you know internally, I'd be more inclined to bring in maybe more than one finalist, because they're all going to be external, and all of a sudden with light shined on everybody, sometimes you figure things out that you don't always know, and you see how he engages or she engages in a variety of contexts. And so I think I'd probably in this case lean towards more than one finalist, although I probably could be talked out of it. Tried to make sure every search we did was open until filled. Because, and this is Steve's point, the most important thing is hiring the right person.
The right person.
And if the right person applies after you've already picked 2 finalists, well, then you include a third. Because why would you not hire the person you think is the best just because he or she came to the party late?
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for taking time and speaking about something that you all know quite a bit about. And I hope that the city council will think about the issues we've raised here today. And that's it for this week in our town.